Question 1. When conducting an environmental audit according to ISO 14010-1996 guidelines for environmental auditing general principles, which characteristic is most critical for selecting key performance indicators, KPI, to effectively assess an organization's environmental management system and its compliance with relevant environmental regulations such as the European Union's Emissions Trading System, EU ETS? Option A. The KPI's alignment with the organization's financial reporting standards, even if environmental relevance is indirect. Option B. The KPI's potential to generate positive public relations for the auditee, regardless of its measurable environmental impact. Option C. The KPI's ability to benchmark the organization's performance against industry best practices, irrespective of its specific operational context. Option D. The KPI's direct and verifiable correlation to specific environmental aspects and impacts identified within the audit scope. Correct answer is D. The KPI's direct and verifiable correlation to specific environmental aspects and impacts identified within the audit scope. Explanation. The core principle of environmental auditing, as guided by ISO 14010-1996, is to provide an objective assessment of an organization's environmental performance. When selecting key performance indicators, KPI, for an audit, the focus must be on those that directly relate to the audit objectives and scope, and that can be reliably measured and verified. KPIs are crucial for tracking progress, identifying areas for improvement, and demonstrating compliance with environmental legislation and internal policies. They should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART. In the context of an environmental audit under ISO 14010, the selection of KPIs must be driven by the potential environmental impacts and risks associated with the auditee's operations, as well as the specific goals of the audit. For instance, if an audit aims to assess the effectiveness of a company's waste management program, relevant KPIs might include the total volume of hazardous waste generated per unit of production, the percentage of waste diverted from landfill through recycling or reuse, or the number of environmental incidents related to waste handling. These indicators provide quantifiable data that an auditor can analyze to draw conclusions about the environmental management system's performance. The selection process should involve understanding the organization's environmental policy, objectives, and the applicable regulatory framework, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) in the United States, or equivalent national legislation. The chosen KPIs should enable the auditor to determine whether the organization is meeting its environmental commitments and legal obligations. Question 2. When developing an environmental audit program in alignment with ISO 14010-1996, which foundational step is paramount before proceeding with the selection of audit criteria or the appointment of audit team members? Option A. Conducting a preliminary assessment of the organization's environmental performance history. Option B. Establishing a comprehensive list of all applicable environmental regulations, such as the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA. Option C. Developing detailed checklists for verifying the implementation of specific environmental controls. Option D. Clearly defining the scope and objectives for each intended audit within the program. Correct answer is D. Clearly defining the scope and objectives for each intended audit within the program. Explanation. ISO 14010-1996, the foundational standard for environmental auditing, outlines general principles crucial for conducting effective audits. A core element of establishing a robust environmental audit program, as detailed in the standard, involves defining the scope and objectives of the audit. This initial phase sets the boundaries and purpose of the audit, ensuring that it remains focused and relevant to the organization's environmental management system and regulatory compliance. Without a clearly defined scope and objective, an audit can become unfocused, leading to inefficient use of resources and potentially missing critical environmental aspects. The standard emphasizes that the program should also consider the organization's environmental policy, legal and other requirements applicable to the entity, and the significant environmental aspects identified. Furthermore, it stresses the importance of assigning appropriate resources and ensuring the competence of the audit team. However, the absolute prerequisite for initiating any audit within the program is the establishment of its specific parameters. This includes identifying which facilities, processes, or environmental aspects will be examined, and what specific outcomes are expected from the audit process, such as verifying compliance with specific regulations like the Clean Air Act, or identifying opportunities for pollution prevention. Question 3. During an environmental audit of a manufacturing facility that produces industrial solvents, an auditor identifies a significant discrepancy between the self-reported volatile organic compound, VOC, emissions data submitted to the local Environmental Protection Agency, and the readings from the facility's Continuous Emissions Monitoring System, SEMS, for the same fiscal year. The self-reported data suggests a 15% reduction in VOCs, while the SEMS data indicates a 5% increase. The audit's objective is to verify compliance with the facility's environmental permit and assess the effectiveness of its pollution control measures. Which of the following actions best aligns with the principles of data collection and verification as per ISO 14010, 1996? Option A. Seek additional, independent data sources to corroborate or refute the conflicting emission figures, such as reviewing maintenance logs for the SEMS, interviewing plant operators regarding process changes, and potentially conducting a follow-up site visit with calibrated measurement equipment. Option B. Request the facility to provide a written explanation for the discrepancy and consider the audit concluded once a plausible, though unverified, reason is provided by management. Option C. Immediately issue a non-conformance report based on the SEMS data, assuming the self-reported figures are intentionally misleading without further investigation. Option D. Accept the self-reported data as the official record for the purpose of the audit, as it is the documentation submitted to the regulatory authority, and focus audit efforts on other compliance areas. The correct answer is A. Seek additional, independent data sources to corroborate or refute the conflicting emission figures, such as reviewing maintenance logs for the SEMS, interviewing plant operators regarding process changes, and potentially conducting a follow-up site visit with calibrated measurement equipment. Explanation. The core principle of data collection and verification in environmental auditing, as outlined by ISO 14010, 1996, emphasizes the need for evidence that is both sufficient and appropriate. Sufficiency refers to the quantity of data required to draw a sound conclusion, while appropriateness relates to the quality and relevance of that data to the audit objectives. When an auditor encounters discrepancies or uncertainties in collected data, such as conflicting emission reports from different monitoring periods or variations in waste manifest records, the primary action dictated by the standard is to seek additional corroborating evidence. This involves expanding the scope of data collection to include other sources or methods that can validate or refute the initial findings. For instance, if an internal report suggests a reduction in wastewater discharge, but external sampling data indicates otherwise, the auditor must investigate further. This could involve reviewing process logs, interviewing operational staff, conducting independent sampling, or examining regulatory compliance records for the period in question. The goal is to establish a clear and verifiable basis for any audit findings, ensuring that conclusions are objective and defensible, and that the audit effectively addresses the environmental aspects under review, aligning with the overall purpose of the Environmental Management System audit. Question 4. Consider an environmental auditor tasked with evaluating a manufacturing facility's compliance with the Waste Minimization Act of 1990. The auditor, possessing a general understanding of waste management principles, relies heavily on the facility's self-reported data regarding hazardous waste generation and disposal, without independently verifying the accuracy or completeness of this data through site inspections or interviews with operational staff. Furthermore, the auditor does not consult any specific regulatory guidance documents or case law pertaining to the interpretation of hazardous waste, as defined by the Act for the facility's specific industrial processes, which fundamental principle of environmental auditing as described in ISO 14010, 1996 has been most significantly compromised in this scenario. Option A, confidentiality. Option B, due professional care. Option C, independence and impartiality. Option D, competence. The correct answer is B, due professional care. Explanation. The principle of due professional care in environmental auditing, as outlined in ISO 14010, 1996, mandates that auditors exercise the same level of diligence and competence that a reasonably prudent auditor would exercise in similar circumstances. This involves meticulous planning, thorough execution of audit procedures, and objective reporting of findings. It requires auditors to be knowledgeable about relevant environmental laws, regulations, and industry best practices, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) in the United States, or equivalent national legislation. Due professional care means not only possessing the necessary skills, but also applying them conscientiously throughout the audit process. This includes gathering sufficient appropriate evidence to support conclusions, maintaining professional skepticism to avoid over-reliance on management assertions, and documenting work performed to demonstrate the basis for findings. It also implies a commitment to continuous professional development to stay abreast of evolving environmental standards and auditing techniques. Failure to exercise due professional care can lead to inaccurate audit conclusion, inadequate identification of environmental risks, and potential non-compliance with legal obligations, thereby undermining the credibility and effectiveness of the audit. Question 5. In the context of mergers and acquisitions, what is the fundamental objective of conducting an environmental transaction audit as outlined by the principles in ISO 14010, 1996? Option A. To ascertain the environmental liabilities and risks associated with a specific business transaction to inform decision-making. Option B. To ensure compliance with all local environmental regulations for the past 5 years of operation of the target entity. Option C. To evaluate the overall environmental management system effectiveness of both the acquiring and target companies. Option D. To develop a long-term environmental improvement strategy for the combined post-acquisition organization. The correct answer is A. To ascertain the environmental liabilities and risks associated with a specific business transaction to inform decision-making. Explanation. The core principle of a transaction audit, as guided by ISO 14010, 1996, is to assess the environmental liabilities and risks associated with a specific business transaction, such as a merger, acquisition, or divestiture. This involves a focused examination of the environmental aspects of the target entity or asset. The objective is to provide the acquiring or divesting party with sufficient information to make an informed decision regarding the transaction's financial and environmental implications. This includes identifying potential environmental noncompliance, contamination, or future remediation costs that could impact the deal's valuation or structure. The scope is typically limited to the period and operations relevant to the transaction, distinguishing it from a comprehensive environmental management system audit. Therefore, the primary purpose is to evaluate the environmental condition of the entity or asset being transferred to understand the associated financial and legal exposure. Question 6. Consider an environmental audit conducted for a manufacturing facility that produces industrial chemicals. The audit team is tasked with evaluating the facility's adherence to national wastewater discharge regulations and its internal commitment to reducing hazardous waste generation by 15% within the next fiscal year. Which of the following best describes the fundamental role of the established wastewater discharge limits and the internal waste reduction target in this audit scenario, according to the principles of ISO 14010, 1996? Option A. They serve as the essential audit criteria against which the facility's environmental performance and management system effectiveness are objectively assessed. Option B. They are primarily informational documents that provide context but do not dictate the scope or methodology of the audit. Option C. They are secondary considerations, with the primary focus being on the general environmental impact of the facility's operations regardless of specific targets or regulations. Option D. They represent potential areas for future audit focus, but do not form the primary basis for the current audit's findings. The correct answer is A. They serve as the essential audit criteria against which the facility's environmental performance and management system effectiveness are objectively assessed. Explanation. The core principle of an environmental audit, as outlined in ISO 14010, 1996, is to systematically gather and evaluate objective evidence to determine whether an organization's environmental activities, products, and services conform to the established audit criteria. The purpose extends beyond mere compliance with laws and regulations. It encompasses assessing the effectiveness of the environmental management system, EMS, and identifying opportunities for improvement. This process involves a structured approach to planning, conducting, reporting, and following up on audits. The audit criteria are fundamental to the entire process, providing the benchmark against which performance is measured. These criteria can include internal policies and procedures, legal and regulatory requirements, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act in the United States, or similar national environmental legislation, contractual obligations, and the requirements of voluntary standards like ISO 14001. Without clearly defined and agreed-upon audit criteria, the audit process would lack a basis for evaluation, rendering its findings subjective and unreliable. Therefore, the identification and use of appropriate audit criteria are paramount to achieving the objectives of an environmental audit, which are to provide management with information regarding the environmental performance of the organization and the effectiveness of its EMS. Question 7. Consider an industrial facility that has implemented a comprehensive environmental management system aimed at reducing its wastewater discharge. An external audit, conducted in accordance with ISO 14010-1996 guidelines, is tasked with evaluating the effectiveness of this system. Which of the following best describes the primary objective of this environmental performance audit in relation to the facility's stated goal of reducing wastewater discharge? Option A. To assess the completeness and documentation of the environmental management system procedures related to wastewater treatment and disposal. Option B. To verify the extent to which the facility has achieved its specific targets for wastewater discharge reduction, considering relevant regulatory limits and internal performance indicators. Option C. To identify potential future opportunities for innovation in wastewater treatment technologies that the facility could adopt. Option D. To confirm that all personnel involved in wastewater management have received adequate training on environmental protocols. Correct answer is B. To verify the extent to which the facility has achieved its specific targets for wastewater discharge reduction, considering relevant regulatory limits and internal performance indicators. Explanation. The core principle of an environmental performance audit, as guided by ISO 14010-1996, is to determine the extent to which environmental performance objectives and targets have been met. This involves a systematic and independent examination of an organization's environmental performance against established criteria. These criteria are typically derived from the organization's own environmental policy, objectives, targets, and legal requirements. The audit's focus is on the outcomes of environmental management activities, not just the existence of procedures. Therefore, the most accurate statement reflects this outcome-oriented approach. The audit seeks to verify if the implemented environmental management system, EMS, is effectively achieving the desired environmental improvements. This includes assessing compliance with relevant environmental legislation, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) in the United States, or equivalent national regulations, as these form a critical part of the performance criteria. The audit also examines the efficiency of resource utilization and the reduction of environmental impacts. It is about evaluating the effectiveness of the EMS in achieving measurable improvements in environmental performance. Question 8. When conducting an environmental audit according to ISO 14010-1996, and an auditee seems uncertain about a specific environmental procedure relevant to their role, what is the most appropriate action for the auditor to take during the interview? Option A. Note the auditee's uncertainty and proceed to interview another individual without further inquiry into the matter. Option B. Suggest that the auditee consult their supervisor or the environmental manager for clarification after the audit concludes. Option C. Ask clarifying questions to understand the auditee's interpretation and application of the procedure, seeking specific examples of their actions. Option D. Immediately provide a detailed explanation of the procedure and demonstrate its correct implementation. The correct answer is C. Ask clarifying questions to understand the auditee's interpretation and application of the procedure, seeking specific examples of their actions. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14010-1996 regarding interviews with personnel emphasizes obtaining objective evidence through direct communication. Auditors must be prepared to ask open-ended questions that encourage detailed responses, allowing for the exploration of the auditee's understanding and implementation of environmental management system procedures. The auditor's role is to gather information, not to provide training or guidance during the audit itself. Therefore, while clarifying the scope of the audit or specific procedures might be necessary for comprehension, the primary objective of an interview is to assess compliance and identify potential areas for improvement based on the auditee's perspective and actions. This involves listening actively, observing nonverbal cues, and probing for specific examples that validate or contradict stated practices. The auditor must maintain impartiality and focus on factual information relevant to the audit criteria. The goal is to understand how the environmental management system operates in practice, as perceived and executed by the individuals responsible for its implementation. Question 9. Consider an environmental auditing firm, EcoVeritas, that is contracted by Greenleaf Industries to conduct an audit of their wastewater treatment facility. A senior auditor at EcoVeritas, MS Anya Sharma, discovers that her sibling is a mid-level manager in Greenleaf Industries' environmental compliance department. MS. Sharma has no direct supervisory or reporting relationship with her sibling within Greenleaf Industries, nor is her sibling involved in the specific wastewater treatment facility being audited. According to the general principles of environmental auditing, as described in ISO 14010-1996, what is the primary ethical consideration regarding MS. Sharma's involvement in this audit? Option A. The direct reporting line between MS. Sharma and her sibling, which would necessitate immediate disqualification from the audit. Option B. The financial implications for EcoVeritas if the audit reveals significant noncompliance, which is a standard auditor responsibility. Option C. The potential for perceived bias or conflict of interest, requiring disclosure and potential reassignment to maintain impartiality. Option D. The fact that MS. Sharma's sibling is not directly involved in the audited facility, making the familial relationship irrelevant to audit objectivity. The correct answer is C. The potential for perceived bias or conflict of interest, requiring disclosure and potential reassignment to maintain impartiality. Explanation: the foundational principle of impartiality in environmental auditing, as outlined in ISO 14010-1996, mandates that auditors must not allow commercial, financial, or other pressures to compromise their professional judgment. This principle is crucial for ensuring the credibility and objectivity of the audit process. Auditors are expected to maintain a stance free from bias and conflict of interest, which could influence the findings or conclusions of the audit. This means avoiding situations where the auditor has a vested interest in the outcome of the audit for the auditee organization. For instance, an auditor who previously worked for the auditee or has a close personal relationship with key personnel within the auditee organization might find it challenging to remain impartial. Similarly, if an auditor's firm stands to gain financially from specific audit outcomes beyond standard auditing fees, this could also present a conflict. Maintaining independence ensures that the audit focuses solely on verifying compliance with environmental regulations and the organization's own environmental management system, without external influences dictating the results. This commitment to impartiality is a cornerstone of professional auditing practice, underpinning the trust placed in audit reports by stakeholders, regulatory bodies, and management. Question 10. Following an environmental audit of a manufacturing facility that revealed a recurring nonconformity regarding improper disposal of a specific chemical byproduct, leading to potential soil contamination, what is the primary responsibility of the auditor during the follow-up phase, according to the general principles outlined in ISO 14010-1996? Option A. Verifying that the auditee has implemented corrective actions, addressing the root cause of the nonconformity, and assessing the effectiveness of these actions. Option B. Documenting the nonconformity for future audits without confirming the auditee's corrective actions or their effectiveness. Option C. Directly assisting the auditee in developing a new waste management plan to comply with local environmental regulations. Option D. Issuing a formal warning to the auditee and demanding immediate cessation of all chemical byproduct disposal activities. Correct answer is A. verifying that the auditee has implemented corrective actions, addressing the root cause of the nonconformity, and assessing the effectiveness of these actions. Explanation: the core principle of follow-up and corrective action in environmental auditing, as guided by ISO 14010, 1996, is to ensure that identified nonconformities are addressed effectively and that preventive measures are implemented to avoid recurrence. This involves verifying the implementation and effectiveness of corrective actions taken by the auditee. The process is iterative and aims to drive continual improvement of the environmental management system. It is crucial that the auditor confirms that the auditee has not only taken action to correct the immediate issue, but has also investigated the root cause of the nonconformity and implemented measures to prevent it from happening again. This verification process is a critical component of the auditor's role in ensuring the integrity and functionality of the environmental management system. The auditor's responsibility extends to confirming that the auditee's response to findings is adequate and that the environmental management system is being improved as a result of the audit process. This includes assessing whether the auditee has reviewed the effectiveness of their corrective actions and made necessary adjustments. Question 11. Consider a scenario where an environmental auditor, previously engaged by a large chemical manufacturing facility to assist in the design and implementation of their new wastewater treatment protocols, is subsequently assigned to conduct a comprehensive environmental audit of that same facility. The audit scope includes an evaluation of the effectiveness of these wastewater treatment protocols and compliance with national discharge limits, such as those set by the Clean Water Act in the United States, which ethical consideration as per ISO 14010, 1996 Guidelines for Environmental Auditing General Principles is most directly challenged by this auditor's prior involvement. Option A. Communicating findings effectively to stakeholders. Option B. Maintaining impartiality and avoiding conflicts of interest. Option C. Demonstrating professional competence and due care. Option D. Ensuring confidentiality of sensitive environmental data. The correct answer is B. Maintaining impartiality and avoiding conflicts of interest. Explanation: the core principle of impartiality in environmental auditing, as outlined in ISO 14010, 1996, mandates that auditors maintain objectivity and avoid conflicts of interest. This means an auditor should not audit an organization for which they have recently provided management consulting services related to the environmental management system, nor should they have a financial interest in the audited entity. The guidelines emphasize that the auditor's judgment should not be compromised by personal relationships or external pressures. Therefore, an auditor who previously assisted a manufacturing plant in developing its waste reduction strategy, which is now the subject of an environmental audit, would be considered to have a conflict of interest. This situation directly violates the principle of impartiality because the auditor's prior involvement could bias their assessment of the effectiveness and implementation of the very strategy they helped create. Such a scenario undermines the credibility and reliability of the audit findings. Maintaining impartiality ensures that the audit is conducted fairly and that the resulting report accurately reflects the environmental performance of the organization, free from undue influence or personal bias. This commitment to objectivity is fundamental to the integrity of the entire auditing process and the trust placed in audit conclusions by stakeholders, regulatory bodies, and the organization itself. Question 12. Following an environmental audit conducted in accordance with ISO 14010, 1996, the audit team has documented several instances where the organization's waste segregation procedures do not fully align with national hazardous waste regulations, specifically referencing the Environmental Protection Agency's EPA, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) guidelines. The audit report clearly outlines these discrepancies. Which of the following actions best exemplifies the appropriate follow-up responsibility of the audit team as per the general principles of environmental auditing? Option A. Submitting the audit report to the regulatory authority without any further engagement with the auditee regarding the identified issues. Option B. Directly assisting the auditee's environmental department in developing new waste segregation protocols and physically overseeing their implementation. Option C. Conducting a new, separate audit focused solely on the waste segregation process before any follow-up on the initial findings occurs. Option D. reviewing evidence of the auditee's implemented corrective actions to verify their effectiveness in achieving compliance with RCRA guidelines and preventing recurrence of nonconformities. Correct answer is D. Reviewing evidence of the auditee's implemented corrective actions to verify their effectiveness in achieving compliance with RCRA guidelines and preventing recurrence of nonconformities. Explanation: the core principle of reporting and follow-up in environmental auditing, as guided by ISO 14010-1996, emphasizes the proactive management of identified environmental issues. Upon completion of an audit, the audit team is responsible for preparing a comprehensive audit report. This report serves as the primary communication tool, detailing the findings, conclusions, and recommendations. A critical aspect of the follow-up process is ensuring that the auditee addresses the identified nonconformities and implements the recommended corrective actions. This involves verifying the effectiveness of the actions taken. ISO 14010-1996 stresses that the auditor should not be directly involved in implementing the corrective actions, but should review their implementation and effectiveness. The objective is to confirm that the environmental management system is being improved and that the issues raised are being resolved to prevent recurrence. This verification process is crucial for demonstrating the value and impact of the audit. The standard also highlights the importance of timely communication of the report to relevant management levels within the auditee organization to facilitate prompt decision-making and action. Question 13. During an environmental audit of a manufacturing facility that produces specialty chemicals, an auditor observes that the wastewater discharge logs show consistently low levels of a regulated pollutant, well within permitted limits under the Clean Water Act. However, during an interview, a plant operator mentions that the facility recently implemented a new experimental pretreatment process that has not yet been formally validated. Considering the principles of ISO 14010-1996 regarding audit procedures and evidence gathering, what is the most appropriate course of action for the auditor? Option A. Conclude that the facility is in compliance based on the submitted discharge logs and focus the remainder of the audit on other areas of the environmental management system. Option B. Request detailed documentation and data related to the experimental pretreatment process, including validation studies and any internal monitoring results, to assess its effectiveness and impact on discharge quality. Option C. Issue a minor nonconformity report immediately due to the mention of an unvalidated process, pending further investigation by regulatory authorities. Option D. Assume the new process is effective and simply note the operator's comment as a point of interest for future audits without further immediate investigation. The correct answer is B. Request detailed documentation and data related to the experimental pretreatment process, including validation studies and any internal monitoring results, to assess its effectiveness and impact on discharge quality. Explanation: ISO 14010-1996, under its section on audit procedures, emphasizes the importance of a systematic, documented, and objective approach to gathering evidence. The core principle is that audit evidence should be sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful to support audit findings and conclusions. When an auditor encounters a situation where initial evidence gathering suggests a potential nonconformity, but further investigation using different techniques or sources could either confirm or refute this, the auditor must continue the process. This involves employing a range of audit techniques, such as reviewing documentation, conducting interviews, and performing on-site observations to triangulate findings. The objective is not to stop at the first indication of a problem, but to thoroughly investigate until a definitive conclusion can be drawn based on verifiable information. This iterative process of evidence collection and evaluation is crucial for the integrity and validity of the audit. The standard stresses that audit conclusions should be based on the preponderance of evidence obtained, not on assumptions or incomplete data. Therefore, the auditor's responsibility extends to ensuring that all reasonable avenues for evidence collection are pursued to establish a clear understanding of the environmental management system's performance against the audit criteria. Question 14. A chemical processing plant in a region with stringent air quality regulations, including specific emission limits for volatile organic compounds, VOC, and particulate matter, is undergoing an external review. Primary objective of this review is to verify whether the plant's current operational practices and installed pollution control technologies consistently meet the thresholds defined in its operating permits and the National Environmental Protection Agency's directives. Which type of environmental audit, as outlined by the principles in ISO 14010, 1996, would most accurately characterize this review's focus? Option A, compliance audit. Option B, due diligence audit. Option C, first-party audit. Option D, management system audit. The correct answer is A, compliance audit. Explanation: ISO 14010, 1996, the foundational standard for environmental auditing, categorizes audits based on their primary objective and scope. A compliance audit, a specific type, is fundamentally designed to determine whether an organization's activities, operations, and environmental management system adhere to specified criteria. These criteria can include legislative requirements, regulatory permits, internal policies, and contractual obligations. For instance, if a manufacturing facility is subject to the Clean Air Act, a compliance audit would meticulously examine emission records, pollution control equipment maintenance logs, and operational procedures to ascertain whether they meet the Act's stipulated limits and reporting mandates. The focus is on the degree of conformity with established rules and standards, rather than assessing the overall effectiveness or efficiency of the environmental management system itself, although non-compliance often points to systemic weaknesses. This audit type is crucial for regulatory oversight and for ensuring that an organization operates within the bounds of environmental law. Question 15. During an environmental compliance audit of a manufacturing facility operating under stringent regional emission standards, what is the most crucial element for the lead auditor to focus on when evaluating evidence related to air pollutant discharge permits? Option A, the subjective opinion of the facility's environmental manager regarding adherence to permit conditions. Option B, the direct correlation between the documented emission monitoring data and the specific limits stipulated in the facility's air discharge permit. Option C, the historical trends of the facility's energy consumption as an indirect indicator of potential emissions. Option D, the overall efficiency of the facility's pollution control equipment, regardless of its compliance with permit specifications. The correct answer is B, the direct correlation between the documented emission monitoring data and the specific limits stipulated in the facility's air discharge permit. Explanation: the core principle of an environmental compliance audit, as guided by ISO 14010, 1996, is to determine whether an organization's activities, products, and services conform to applicable environmental laws, regulations, permits, and other requirements. This involves a systematic and documented process of obtaining evidence and evaluating it objectively to ascertain the extent to which audit criteria are met. The auditor's primary responsibility is to gather sufficient and appropriate evidence to support their findings and conclusions. This evidence forms the basis for assessing compliance. Therefore, the most critical aspect for the auditor in a compliance audit is to ensure that the evidence collected directly relates to the specific environmental, legal, and regulatory obligations the organization is subject to. Without this direct linkage, the audit findings would lack the necessary foundation to confirm or deny compliance with relevant environmental legislation, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, in the United States, or similar regional directives and national laws. The auditor must meticulously document how each piece of evidence supports or refutes adherence to a particular requirement. Question 16. When commencing an environmental audit in accordance with ISO 14010, 1996, which of the following actions during the document review and preparation phase best exemplifies the principle of establishing a clear understanding of the auditee's environmental management system and its compliance obligations? Option A, directly interviewing key operational personnel to ascertain their understanding of environmental procedures without prior review of any written documentation. Option B, focusing solely on the organization's financial statements to assess the economic impact of environmental compliance measures. Option C, analyzing the organization's documented environmental policy, its legal register of applicable environmental regulations, e.g., Clean Air Act provisions, and records of environmental performance indicators to identify potential areas for detailed examination during the on-site phase. Option D, conducting a comprehensive site inspection to observe all environmental practices before reviewing any of the organization's internal documentation. The correct answer is C. Analyzing the organization's documented environmental policy, its legal register of applicable environmental regulations, e.g., Clean Air Act provisions, and records of environmental performance indicators to identify potential areas for detailed examination during the on-site phase. Explanation: the initial phase of an environmental audit, as outlined in ISO 14010-1996, emphasizes thorough document review and preparation. This stage is crucial for establishing the audit scope, objectives, and for gaining a foundational understanding of the auditee's environmental management system (EMS) and its operational context. The auditor must review a range of documents to identify potential areas of concern, assess compliance with relevant legislation and regulations, and plan the audit activities effectively. Key documents include the organization's environmental policy, its EMS manual, procedures, records of environmental performance, e.g., emissions data, waste manifests, energy consumption, legal registers, previous audit reports, and emergency response plans. The purpose of this review is not to conduct the audit itself, but to gather sufficient information to inform the development of the audit plan, including the specific areas to be examined, the audit criteria, and the resources required. This preparatory work ensures that the audit is efficient, focused, and addresses the most significant environmental aspects and potential compliance gaps. For instance, reviewing a company's waste disposal manifests alongside its waste management procedures allows the auditor to verify that actual practices align with documented policies and regulatory requirements, such as the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, in the United States, or equivalent waste management directives in other jurisdictions. This proactive document examination helps to identify potential nonconformities before on-site activities commence, leading to a more targeted and effective audit. Question 17. When assembling an environmental audit team for a multinational manufacturing firm with operations in regions subject to varying environmental regulations, such as the European Union's REACH directive and the United States TSCA, what is the most crucial combination of attributes to prioritize during the selection process? According to the general principles outlined in ISO 14010-1996, Option A, a diverse blend of technical expertise relevant to the manufacturing processes and environmental aspects, combined with proven independence from the auditee and a demonstrated understanding of the applicable international and regional environmental regulatory frameworks. Option B, a team composed solely of individuals with advanced degrees in environmental science and extensive experience in regulatory compliance, even if they lack specific auditing experience. Option C, extensive knowledge of general management principles and a high degree of familiarity with the auditee's internal organizational structure to facilitate efficient communication. Option D, prior experience in auditing similar manufacturing sectors, regardless of geographical regulatory differences, and a strong track record of meeting audit deadlines to ensure timely reporting. The correct answer is A, a diverse blend of technical expertise relevant to the manufacturing processes and environmental aspects, combined with proven independence from the auditee and a demonstrated understanding of the applicable international and regional environmental regulatory frameworks. Explanation: the selection of an audit team for an environmental audit, as guided by ISO 14010-1996, hinges on several critical factors to ensure the audit's effectiveness and impartiality. The primary consideration is the team's collective competence, which encompasses the necessary knowledge, skills, and experience relevant to the specific audit scope. This includes understanding environmental management systems, relevant environmental legislation, such as the Clean Air Act or the Water Pollution Control Act, depending on the auditee's operations, auditing principles, and the auditee's specific industry sector. Independence and objectivity are paramount. Team members must not have any financial or other interests in the auditee that could compromise their unbiased judgment. This independence extends to avoiding conflicts of interest, such as having audited the same unit within the last 2 years or being employed by the auditee. The team leader must possess strong leadership and communication skills to manage the audit process and effectively interact with audit personnel. Furthermore, the team should possess a diversity of expertise to cover all aspects of the audit scope, which might include specialists in areas like waste management, air emissions, or water discharge, depending on the organization's environmental footprint. The overall size of the team should be appropriate for the scope and complexity of the audit, ensuring efficient use of resources without compromising thoroughness. Therefore, the most comprehensive approach to team selection integrates these elements, prioritizing competence, independence, and the specific needs of the audit. Question 18. Consider a scenario during an environmental audit of a manufacturing facility where the auditor is attempting to verify the implementation of a specific waste segregation procedure. The available documentary evidence, such as logbooks and disposal manifests, is incomplete, with several critical periods showing no entries. Furthermore, personnel directly responsible for overseeing and executing this waste segregation process are on extended leave and unavailable for interviews or clarification. Given these circumstances, what is the most appropriate approach for the auditor regarding the evaluation of evidence for this particular procedure? Option A. Assume the procedure is being followed correctly in the absence of contradictory evidence, given the personnel's absence. Option B. Conclude that the procedure is non-compliant based on the missing documentation, even without direct evidence of non-conformance. Option C. Document the inability to verify compliance with the waste segregation procedure due to insufficient and uncorroborated evidence. Option D. Seek out and interview other employees in different departments who may have tangential knowledge of waste handling practices. The correct answer is C. Document the inability to verify compliance with the waste segregation procedure due to insufficient and uncorroborated evidence. Explanation. The core principle of evaluating audit evidence under ISO 14010-1996 is to ensure it is sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful for drawing conclusions. Sufficiency refers to the quantity of evidence. Reliability relates to its accuracy and objectivity. Relevance means it directly pertains to the audit objectives and criteria, and usefulness implies it aids in making sound judgments. When an auditor encounters a situation where the available documentation for a specific environmental procedure is incomplete and the personnel responsible for its execution are unavailable for interviews, the auditor must consider the implications for the audit's conclusiveness. The primary concern is whether the lack of corroborating evidence, both documentary and testimonial, prevents the auditor from forming a well-supported opinion on the conformity of the environmental management system with the audit criteria. In such a scenario, the auditor cannot simply assume compliance or non-compliance. Instead, the auditor must acknowledge the limitation in the evidence obtained. This limitation means that the auditor cannot definitively confirm whether the procedure was followed as intended or if it deviates from established requirements. Therefore, the most appropriate action is to note this inability to verify compliance due to insufficient evidence. This directly impacts the audit findings and the overall audit report, highlighting a gap in the verification process. It is not about finding alternative evidence that might be less reliable, nor is it about making assumptions. The principle is to report what can be substantiated by the evidence gathered. Question 19. Assessment of the situation for an environmental audit of a multinational manufacturing firm reveals that the lead auditor has extensive experience in general quality management systems auditing and a degree in business administration. While the auditor has completed a short online course on environmental regulations, they have no prior experience auditing against specific environmental standards or assessing compliance with statutes like the European Union's REACH, registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals, regulation. Considering the principles of auditor competence as defined in ISO 14010-1996, which statement best describes the deficiency in the auditor's qualifications for conducting a comprehensive environmental audit? Option A. Absence of a formal certification in quality auditing, which is a prerequisite for all ISO audits. Option B. Insufficient demonstrated knowledge of specific environmental management principles and relevant regulatory frameworks beyond a general awareness. Option C. Lack of experience in general business management practices, which are foundational to all auditing. Option D. Insufficient practical experience in conducting audits of financial statements, a key component of environmental performance evaluation? The correct answer is B. Insufficient demonstrated knowledge of specific environmental management principles and relevant regulatory frameworks beyond a general awareness. Explanation: the core principle of auditor competence, as outlined in ISO 14010-1996, emphasizes a combination of education, experience, and training. Specifically, it requires auditors to possess a thorough understanding of environmental management principles, auditing techniques, and relevant regulatory frameworks. This includes knowledge of national and local environmental laws, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) in the United States, and their international equivalents, which govern emissions, waste management, and pollution control. Furthermore, auditors must demonstrate proficiency in gathering and analyzing evidence, maintaining objectivity, and communicating findings effectively. The ability to conduct an audit in accordance with the established guidelines, including planning, fieldwork, reporting, and follow-up, is paramount. A critical aspect is the auditor's independence and impartiality, ensuring that their judgment is not compromised by any existing relationship with the auditee. While general management principles are beneficial, the specific focus for environmental auditing competence lies in the specialized knowledge and skills directly applicable to evaluating an organization's environmental performance and management system against defined criteria. Question 20. An environmental auditor, tasked with assessing a manufacturing facility's compliance with local wastewater discharge regulations, discovers that while the facility's internal monitoring data consistently shows effluent quality within permitted limits, independent sampling conducted by a regulatory agency shortly after the audit revealed a significant, albeit temporary, exceedance of a specific pollutant. The facility manager attributes this to an unforeseen equipment malfunction that was immediately rectified. Considering the auditor's role in providing an objective assessment of the environmental management system and its effectiveness, which of the following best reflects the auditor's primary responsibility in reporting this situation? Option A. Document the discrepancy as a potential nonconformance, highlighting the need for the auditee to investigate the root cause and implement preventive measures, while also noting the conflicting internal and external data points. Option B. Conclude that the facility's environmental management system is effective, as internal monitoring data indicated compliance, and the external exceedance was an isolated, unpreventable incident. Option C. Report the regulatory agency's findings as a definitive nonconformance without further inquiry, assuming the facility's internal data was deliberately manipulated to conceal the issue. Option D. Focus solely on the internal monitoring data provided by the facility, as this represents the auditee's established processes and is the primary source of information for the audit. Correct answer is A. Document the discrepancy as a potential nonconformance, highlighting the need for the auditee to investigate the root cause and implement preventive measures, while also noting the conflicting internal and external data points. Explanation: the core principle of environmental auditing, as outlined in ISO 14010-1996, emphasizes the auditor's responsibility to conduct the audit with professional integrity and objectivity. This involves maintaining a fair and unbiased perspective throughout the audit process, from planning to reporting. Auditors must avoid conflicts of interest that could compromise their impartiality. They are expected to gather sufficient and appropriate evidence to support their findings and conclusions. The ability to communicate findings clearly and concisely to the auditee and relevant stakeholders is also a critical skill. This includes presenting observations, nonconformities, and recommendations in a manner that facilitates understanding and corrective action. Furthermore, auditors must possess a thorough understanding of the relevant environmental legislation and regulatory frameworks applicable to the auditee's operations, such as the Clean Air Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) in the United States, or equivalent national legislation elsewhere. This knowledge allows them to effectively assess compliance and identify potential areas of risk or nonconformance. The auditor's skill set should encompass not only technical knowledge, but also interpersonal skills to build rapport with the auditee and facilitate open communication. Question 21. When compiling the executive summary for an environmental audit report conducted under principles aligned with ISO 14010-1996, Which element is considered the most critical for ensuring its effectiveness in informing organizational leadership about the audit's outcomes and potential impacts on compliance with environmental regulations like the Clean Water Act or RCRA? Option A. A comprehensive discussion of the audit team's methodologies and the specific sampling techniques employed. Option B. A detailed historical overview of the organization's environmental performance trends over the past decade. Option C. A clear, concise distillation of significant findings, conclusions, and actionable recommendations directly linked to audit objectives and regulatory compliance. Option D. An extensive enumeration of all minor observations and procedural deviations encountered during the audit process. The correct answer is C. A clear, concise distillation of significant findings, conclusions, and actionable recommendations directly linked to audit objectives and regulatory compliance. Explanation: the executive summary of an environmental audit report, as guided by principles akin to those in ISO 14010, 1996, serves as a concise distillation of the audit's key findings, conclusions, and recommendations. Its primary purpose is to provide decision-makers, who may not have time to review the entire report, with a clear and accurate overview of the audit's scope, objectives, and the overall environmental performance of the audited entity. It should highlight significant nonconformities, areas of strength, and actionable steps for improvement. The focus is on conveying the most critical information efficiently, enabling informed strategic decisions regarding environmental management systems and compliance. This summary is not a place for exhaustive detail or a rehash of every audit step, but rather a high-level synopsis that captures the essence of the audit's outcomes and their implications for the organization's environmental stewardship and legal adherence. It should be objective, factual, and directly linked to the detailed findings presented in the main body of the report. Question 22. An environmental auditor is reviewing the implementation of an environmental management system at a manufacturing facility. The auditor has identified that, while the organization has a documented environmental policy and some procedural documents, there is a lack of clear assignment of responsibility for environmental performance monitoring at the operational level. Furthermore, the management team has not explicitly allocated sufficient financial resources for ongoing environmental training and the upgrade of pollution control equipment, despite stated objectives for reducing emissions. According to the principles of ISO 14010, 1996 guidelines for environmental auditing general principles, which of the following most accurately reflects the auditor's primary concern regarding management responsibilities in this scenario? Option A. The auditor's primary concern is the insufficient detail in the procedural documents, which may lead to noncompliance with specific environmental permit conditions related to operational monitoring. Option B. The auditor's primary concern is the immediate need for the organization to update its environmental policy to include specific targets for emission reduction, as this is a direct requirement for compliance with environmental regulations. Option C. The auditor's primary concern is the auditor's own responsibility to provide management with a comprehensive list of corrective actions needed to rectify the identified deficiencies in the environmental management system. Option D. The auditor's primary concern is the potential lack of demonstrable management commitment to the environmental management system, evidenced by the absence of clear responsibility assignments and resource allocation for critical environmental functions. The correct answer is D. The auditor's primary concern is the potential lack of demonstrable management commitment to the environmental management system, evidenced by the absence of clear responsibility assignments and resource allocation for critical environmental functions. Explanation: the core principle of management responsibility in environmental auditing, as outlined in ISO 14010, 1996, centers on ensuring that the auditee organization has established and maintains an environmental management system, EMS, that is subject to audit. This involves the commitment of top management to provide the necessary resources, establish clear objectives and policies, and delegate appropriate authority for the EMS. Specifically, management is responsible for ensuring that an EMS is in place and that it is effectively implemented and maintained. This includes fostering a culture of environmental awareness and accountability throughout the organization. The audit process itself is designed to provide an objective assessment of whether the EMS conforms to audit criteria, which are often derived from the organization's own environmental policy and objectives, as well as relevant legal and regulatory requirements. The auditor's role is to assess the adequacy and effectiveness of the EMS, not to redesign it. Therefore, when considering management responsibilities in the context of an environmental audit according to ISO 14010, the focus is on the auditee's commitment to and the operationalization of their EMS, ensuring it is robust enough to manage their environmental aspects and impacts. The auditor evaluates how management has structured the organization to achieve these environmental goals. Question 23. Consider an environmental auditing scenario where the auditing team has discovered a significant deviation from a mandated waste disposal regulation, which is critical for maintaining compliance with the Clean Water Act. The facility manager, aware of the potential penalties, attempts to persuade the lead auditor to downplay the severity of this finding in the final report by highlighting the facility's otherwise strong environmental performance in other areas, which fundamental principle of environmental auditing, as defined in ISO 14010-1996, is the facility manager's action most directly attempting to undermine? Option A, competence. Option B, due professional care. Option C, objectivity and impartiality. Option D, confidentiality. The correct answer is C, objectivity and impartiality. Explanation. The core principle of environmental auditing, as outlined in ISO 14010-1996, emphasizes the importance of objectivity and impartiality. This means that the audit process and its findings should not be influenced by any undue pressure or bias from the organization being audited or any other interested party. Auditors must maintain a professional demeanor, ensuring that their judgments are based solely on the evidence gathered during the audit. This principle underpins the credibility and reliability of the audit report. For instance, if an auditor were to overlook a significant noncompliance because the auditee is a key client of the auditing firm, this would violate the principle of impartiality. Similarly, if an auditor allows personal relationships with auditee personnel to affect their assessment of findings, this also compromises objectivity. Adherence to this principle is crucial for building trust in the environmental auditing process and for ensuring that audits effectively identify areas for environmental performance improvement and compliance with relevant regulations, such as those pertaining to emissions control or waste management, as mandated by national environmental protection agencies. Question 24. When conducting an environmental audit according to the general principles outlined in ISO 14010-1996, what is the primary benefit of an auditor directly observing an organization's waste segregation process for hazardous materials, as opposed to solely reviewing documented procedures and interviewing personnel? Option A. It primarily serves to confirm the accuracy of the organization's environmental training records for employees involved in waste handling. Option B. It enables the auditor to directly calculate the volume of waste generated, which is crucial for regulatory reporting under statutes like the Toxic Substances Control Act. Option C. It provides objective, first-hand evidence of actual practices, allowing for the verification of procedural adherence and the identification of potential environmental risks that may not be captured in documentation or verbal accounts. Option D. It allows the auditor to assess the efficiency of the waste disposal contractor based on the visual appearance of the segregated waste containers. The correct answer is C. It provides objective, first-hand evidence of actual practices, allowing for the verification of procedural adherence and the identification of potential environmental risks that may not be captured in documentation or verbal accounts. Explanation. ISO 14010-1996, under its general principles for environmental auditing, emphasizes the importance of direct observation as a crucial method for gathering audit evidence. This principle is rooted in the understanding that observing actual operations, rather than relying solely on documented procedures or interviews, provides a more objective and comprehensive view of an organization's environmental performance and compliance. When an auditor directly witnesses an activity, they can assess whether stated environmental policies and procedures are being followed in practice. This includes observing the handling of hazardous materials, the operation of pollution control equipment, waste segregation processes, and the general work environment. The objective is to verify the implementation and effectiveness of environmental management systems. For instance, an auditor might observe the loading of chemicals to ensure containment measures are in place and that spills are managed according to documented procedures. Similarly, observing the operation of a wastewater treatment unit can reveal whether it is functioning within permitted parameters, even if monitoring data appears satisfactory on paper. This direct interaction with the operational reality allows for the identification of nonconformities, potential risks, and opportunities for improvement that might not be apparent through other means. The effectiveness of observation is enhanced when the auditor possesses a clear understanding of the relevant environmental legislation, such as the Clean Water Act or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act (RCRA) in the United States, and the organization's own environmental objectives and targets. The auditor must be skilled in recognizing deviations from expected practices and understanding the potential environmental impact of these deviations. Question 25. Following an environmental audit conducted in accordance with ISO 14010-1996, a significant nonconformity was identified regarding the inadequate containment of chemical storage areas, potentially leading to soil contamination. The auditee proposed a corrective action plan that included installing secondary containment bunds around the storage tanks. What is the most critical subsequent step in the corrective action process to ensure the audit's findings lead to sustained environmental improvement? Option A. Documenting the installation of the secondary containment bunds in the facility's environmental management system records. Option B. Investigating whether the nonconformity also violated specific local environmental discharge regulations, such as those pertaining to groundwater protection. Option C. Verifying the effectiveness of the installed secondary containment bunds in preventing spills from reaching the environment. Option D. Reviewing the auditee's internal procedures for chemical handling to identify any procedural deficiencies. The correct answer is C. Verifying the effectiveness of the installed secondary containment bunds in preventing spills from reaching the environment. Explanation. The core principle of implementing corrective actions following an environmental audit, as guided by ISO 14010-1996, is to address the root causes of identified nonconformities and prevent their recurrence. This involves a systematic process that begins with a thorough investigation to understand why the nonconformity occurred. Once the root cause is established, appropriate corrective actions are developed and implemented. Crucially, the effectiveness of these actions must be verified. This verification ensures that the implemented measures have indeed resolved the issue and are preventing its recurrence. The process also necessitates documentation of the entire corrective action cycle, from identification to verification. This systematic approach, focusing on root cause analysis and verification of effectiveness, is fundamental to continuous improvement in environmental management systems. Without this verification step, there is no assurance that the audit findings have led to lasting positive change, undermining the purpose of the audit itself. Therefore, the most critical element is the confirmation that the implemented actions are working as intended. Question 26. Following an environmental audit that revealed an organization exceeded its permitted discharge limits for a specific pollutant, as defined by the Regional Water Quality Control Board regulations, what is the primary objective of the auditor's follow-up activities concerning the identified nonconformity? Option A. To conduct a new, comprehensive audit of the entire environmental management system to identify any other potential compliance issues. Option B. To verify the auditee's implementation and effectiveness of corrective actions designed to address the root cause of the discharge exceedance and prevent its recurrence. Option C. To immediately impose penalties and fines on the organization for violating the Regional Water Quality Control Board regulations. Option D. To document the nonconformity in the audit report and await the auditee's voluntary submission of a remediation plan without further auditor engagement. The correct answer is B. To verify the auditee's implementation and effectiveness of corrective actions designed to address the root cause of the discharge exceedance and prevent its recurrence. Explanation. The core principle of follow-up and corrective action in environmental auditing, as guided by ISO 14010-1996, is to ensure that identified nonconformities are addressed effectively and that the underlying causes are eliminated to prevent recurrence. This process is not merely about fixing the immediate problem, but about driving continuous improvement within the auditee's environmental management system. When an auditor identifies a nonconformity, such as a breach of a specific emission limit stipulated by local environmental regulations like the Clean Air Act, the auditee is responsible for investigating the root cause. This investigation should determine why the emission limit was exceeded. Following the investigation, the auditee must propose and implement corrective actions. These actions should be designed to rectify the nonconformity and address its root cause. For instance, if the nonconformity was due to faulty equipment, the corrective action might involve repair or replacement. If it was due to inadequate training, it might involve enhanced employee education. The auditor's role in the follow-up phase is to verify the effectiveness of these implemented corrective actions. This verification ensures that the actions taken have indeed resolved the nonconformity and prevented its recurrence, thereby strengthening the environmental management system. It is crucial that the follow-up process is systematic and documented, providing evidence of the closure of the nonconformity and the achievement of improved environmental performance. This iterative process of identification, investigation, correction, and verification is fundamental to the auditing process for achieving environmental compliance and fostering a culture of environmental responsibility. Question 27. When establishing the basis for an environmental audit, which of the following best characterizes the essential nature and purpose of audit criteria according to the principles detailed in ISO 14010-1996? Option A. A compilation of competitor environmental performance data used to benchmark the auditee's practices without direct reference to the auditee's internal controls. Option B. A collection of media reports and public perception surveys regarding the organization's environmental impact used to assess public relations rather than system compliance. Option C. A predefined list of potential environmental risks that the audit team will investigate, irrespective of the organization's documented systems. Option D. A comprehensive set of documented policies, procedures, and all relevant statutory and regulatory requirements against which audit evidence is compared to determine conformity and effectiveness. Correct answer is D. A comprehensive set of documented policies, procedures, and all relevant statutory and regulatory requirements against which audit evidence is compared to determine conformity and effectiveness. Explanation. The fundamental principle of establishing audit criteria in environmental auditing, as outlined by ISO 14010-1996, is to ensure that the audit provides a clear and objective basis for evaluating an organization's environmental management system. Audit criteria are the set of policies, procedures, and requirements against which audit evidence is compared. These criteria are essential for determining whether the environmental management system conforms to the planned arrangements, and whether these arrangements are implemented effectively and are suitable for achieving the organization's environmental objectives. For an environmental audit to be credible and useful, the criteria must be clearly defined, understood by all parties involved, and relevant to the scope of the audit. This includes internal policies and procedures established by the organization itself, as well as external requirements such as applicable environmental laws, regulations, permits, and industry standards. The selection and agreement upon these criteria prior to the audit commencement are paramount. For instance, if an organization is being audited against its own stated commitment to reduce hazardous waste, the audit criteria would include the specific procedures it has documented for waste management, the regulatory limits for hazardous waste disposal applicable in its jurisdiction, and any voluntary industry best practices it has adopted. The audit then assesses compliance with these defined benchmarks. Without clearly established criteria, the audit findings would lack objectivity and comparability, rendering the audit process ineffective in identifying areas for improvement or confirming compliance. Question 28. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14010-1996 regarding auditor competence, what is the most critical determinant of an environmental auditor's capability to conduct a thorough and effective audit of a complex industrial facility's compliance with national environmental protection acts, such as the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act? Option A bachelor's degree in any field and successful completion of a basic introductory course on environmental regulations. Option B a combination of formal environmental science education, specific training in environmental auditing methodologies, and practical experience in auditing similar industrial operations. Option C extensive experience in general auditing practices across various sectors, coupled with a strong academic background in any scientific discipline. Option D a comprehensive understanding of general business management principles and a certification in quality management systems. The correct answer is B. A combination of formal environmental science education, specific training in environmental auditing methodologies, and practical experience in auditing similar industrial operations. Explanation: ISO 14010, 1996, in its section on competence of auditors, emphasizes the necessity for auditors to possess appropriate education, training, and experience to conduct environmental audits effectively. This standard specifies that an auditor's competence is not solely based on academic qualifications, but also on practical experience and ongoing professional development. For an environmental auditor to be considered competent, they must demonstrate an understanding of auditing principles, environmental management systems, relevant environmental legislation and regulations, and the specific industry or sector being audited. The training should cover audit methodologies, reporting, and the ability to communicate findings clearly and objectively. This ensures that audits are conducted systematically, reliably, and impartially, providing valuable insights for improving environmental performance and compliance. The standard highlights that the level of education and training should be commensurate with the complexity and scope of the audit. For instance, auditing a multinational chemical manufacturing facility would require a higher degree of specialized knowledge and experience compared to auditing a small office environment. Therefore, ensuring that auditors have undergone recognized training programs and possess a demonstrable track record of relevant experience is a fundamental aspect of establishing the credibility and effectiveness of any environmental audit process, aligning with the overarching goal of promoting environmental responsibility. Question 29. Consider an industrial facility that manufactures specialized ceramic components. Its environmental permit allows for a maximum daily discharge of 50 kg of suspended solids into a local river. During the last quarter, the facility consistently discharged an average of 40 kg of suspended solids per day, well within the permit limit. However, an environmental performance audit, guided by ISO 14010, 1996 principles, also investigates the facility's resource efficiency and waste minimization efforts. The audit reveals that the facility's process generates an average of 500 kg of solid waste per ton of finished product, with 80% of this waste being recyclable materials that are currently being sent to landfill due to a lack of internal reprocessing capabilities. The audit report is to be finalized. Which of the following findings would be most indicative of a deficiency in environmental performance, as contemplated by ISO 14010, 1996, beyond mere regulatory compliance? Option A. Successful implementation of a new wastewater treatment technology that further reduces pollutant levels below permit requirements. Option B. The consistent adherence to the suspended solids discharge limit stipulated in the environmental permit. Option C. The facility's annual report showing a slight increase in energy consumption compared to the previous year. Option D. The substantial proportion of recyclable solid waste being landfilled, indicating a missed opportunity for resource recovery and waste reduction. The correct answer is D. The substantial proportion of recyclable solid waste being landfilled, indicating a missed opportunity for resource recovery and waste reduction. Explanation: ISO 14010, 1996, the cornerstone for environmental auditing, emphasizes that an environmental performance audit is a systematic, documented, and objective evaluation of an organization's environmental performance. This evaluation is conducted against established criteria, which can include internal policies, procedures, and objectives, as well as external legal and regulatory requirements and voluntary commitments. The primary goal is to determine the extent to which an organization's environmental management practices are effective in achieving its stated environmental objectives and in complying with applicable laws and regulations. When assessing environmental performance, Auditors must consider a broad range of factors, not solely compliance with environmental permits. These factors encompass the efficiency of resource utilization, the reduction of waste generation, the control of emissions and discharges, the management of environmental risks, and the overall effectiveness of the environmental management system in driving continuous improvement. For instance, an audit might examine the organization's progress in reducing energy consumption per unit of production, even if current energy usage is within legal limits. This reflects a proactive approach to environmental stewardship and operational efficiency, aligning with the broader principles of environmental performance assessment outlined in the standard. The standard stresses the importance of evidence-based conclusions derived from a comprehensive review of data, records, and operational practices, ensuring the audit provides valuable insights for management decision-making and the enhancement of environmental performance. Question 30. Consider a scenario where an environmental audit of a manufacturing facility is underway. The audit team leader during the on-site phase discovers a potential noncompliance related to a process not explicitly detailed in the initial audit plan, but which appears to have significant environmental implications. According to the general principles of environmental auditing, as guided by ISO 14010, 1996, what action should the audit team leader primarily take regarding this newly identified issue? Option A. Inform the audit team to disregard the observation as it falls outside the agreed-upon audit scope and focus solely on the predefined areas. Option B. Document the observation and discuss with the auditee and client the possibility of extending the audit scope to include this new area, seeking their agreement before proceeding. Option C. Delegate the investigation of the new finding to a junior auditor and request them to assess its relevance without formally altering the audit plan or client agreement. Option D. Immediately expand the audit to investigate the new finding, assuming it falls within the broader objectives of environmental compliance, and report it without prior consultation. The correct answer is B. Document the observation and discuss with the auditee and client the possibility of extending the audit scope to include this new area, seeking their agreement before proceeding. Explanation. The fundamental principle outlined in ISO 14010, 1996 regarding the role of the audit team leader is to ensure the audit is conducted in accordance with the audit plan and relevant standards. This includes managing the audit team, facilitating communication, and making final judgments on audit findings. While the audit team leader is responsible for the overall conduct and reporting of the audit, they do not possess the authority to unilaterally alter the scope of the audit once it has been agreed upon and documented in the audit plan without consulting the auditee and the client. Such modifications require a formal process of agreement and documentation to maintain the integrity and validity of the audit. The audit team leader's primary duty is to oversee the execution of the predefined audit scope, ensuring that all audit objectives are met within the established parameters. This includes managing the team's activities, reviewing evidence, and compiling the final report, all while adhering to the agreed-upon audit plan and the principles of environmental auditing as defined by the standard.